There is a tombstone in Vienna with an equation carved into the stone. I wrote that equation, but it is not my name on the grave. The name on the grave is Ludwig Boltzmann. He was a physicist who made one claim, that everything in the universe is made of invisible particles called atoms. For 30 years, some of the most influential minds in Europe told him he was wrong. They challenged him in journals. They attacked him at conferences. And something, the battle or the illness that had always lived inside him, or both, drove him to the edge. And then he hanged himself in a hotel room while his wife and daughter swam in the sea. And I, the man who wrote that equation, was one of the people who refused to believe him. This is the story of the man I failed. Ludwig Boltzmann made a claim so radical that it divided physics in two. He said that heat is not a substance. Heat is motion. When you feel warmth on your skin, what you feel is billions of invisible particles, atoms and molecules vibrating, colliding, bouncing in every direction. Temperature is not a thing. Temperature is a measure of the energy of particles too small to see. This sounds obvious now. It was not obvious then. And what I am about to tell you is how this simple idea destroyed a man's life. In the 1870s and the 1880s, when Boltzmann developed his theory, many influential physicists in Europe did not believe atoms existed. They had never been observed. No microscope could see them. No instrument could measure them directly. To these scientists, atoms were a fantasy, a mathematical convenience, not a physical reality. Boltzmann said they were real. He said he could prove it with mathematics. He connected the invisible world of atoms to the visible world of heat, pressure, and energy by linking entropy to probability. That link would later be carved on his tombstone, and for this, they tried to destroy him. In 1895, at a scientific congress in Lübeck, Ludwig Boltzmann stood up to defend his life's work. On the other side stood Wilhelm Ostwald, a physical chemist who believed that energy, not matter, was the fundamental substance of the universe. If energy explained everything, then atoms were unnecessary. And if atoms were unnecessary, then Boltzmann's entire life had been wasted. Arnold Sommerfeld, who was in the audience as a young mathematician, described the scene years later. He said the battle between Boltzmann and Ostwald resembled the battle of a bull against a supple matador. But this time, the bull won. Boltzmann's arguments carried the day. All the young mathematicians stood on his side. He won. But winning one battle did not end the war. Boltzmann had two opponents who would not relent. Ostwald was one. The other was Ernst Mach, professor of philosophy and history of science in Vienna. Mach was brilliant, influential, and relentless. He did not believe in atoms. He believed that science should describe only what can be observed, and since no one had observed an atom, atoms did not belong in physics. To Mach, Boltzmann's entire life's work was built on a fiction. Mach and Boltzmann worked at the same university. They saw each other in the hallways. They sat in the same meetings, and Mach made clear, publicly, repeatedly, that he considered Boltzmann's theories to be unscientific. This was not a distant academic disagreement. This was personal. And I, watching from Berlin, said nothing. And here I must be honest about my own role. I was not on Boltzmann's side. Not at first. I believed in the absolute certainty of the second law of thermodynamics. The law that says entropy always increases, that disorder always grows. Boltzmann had shown that this law was not absolute. It was statistical. It was true almost always, but not always. Entropy could decrease. It was just extraordinarily unlikely. This disturbed me deeply. I wanted certainty, and I spent years trying to prove that the second law was absolute without using Boltzmann's statistical methods, without assuming atoms existed. I failed, but my failure took years, and during those years, I was part of the wall that Boltzmann was fighting against. My own assistant, Ernst Zermelo, published a direct attack on Boltzmann's work in 1896. Zermelo argued that Boltzmann's statistical approach was fundamentally incompatible with the laws of mechanics. Boltzmann responded with sarcasm and bitterness. The exchange was painful for both men. I did not intervene. I did not defend Boltzmann. I watched from a distance as a man fought for a truth that I was not yet willing to accept. The battle was destroying Boltzmann from the inside. He had always been prone to dramatic swings of mood, periods of enormous energy and wild enthusiasm, followed by stretches of severe depression. Today, he would likely be diagnosed with bipolar disorder. He joked darkly that his temperament must be because he was born on the night between Mardi Gras and Ash Wednesday, between celebration and penance. In 1900, unable to bear working alongside Mach in Vienna any longer, Boltzmann moved to Leipzig. There, he became a colleague of Ostwald, his strongest scientific opponent, but strangely, a personal friend. The arrangement did not last. While in Leipzig, Boltzmann attempted suicide. He survived. Mach retired from Vienna due to poor health, and in 1902, Boltzmann returned to Vienna to reclaim his old chair. He was given an additional position, the philosophy lectures formerly held by Mach. And here something remarkable happened. Boltzmann's philosophy lectures became the most popular at the university. The largest hall could not contain the audience. Students stood down the staircase and into the corridor. Professors came. Assistants came. The Emperor of Austria himself invited Boltzmann to the palace. For a brief moment, it seemed as though the tide had turned. But Boltzmann lived in constant fear. He told people he was terrified of suddenly losing his mind and memory during a lecture. His eyesight had deteriorated so badly that he needed an assistant to read scientific articles aloud to him. His wife wrote his manuscripts for him. He suffered from asthma, headaches, and deepening depression. He was winning the argument, but his body and mind were losing the war. And then, in the final months of 1900, I did something I had sworn I would never do. I had been working for years on a problem that no one could solve: how hot objects emit light. I had found an equation that matched the experimental data perfectly, but I could not explain why it worked. I tried every approach I knew. Nothing worked. Then, in what I later called an act of desperation, I turned to Boltzmann's methods. The statistical methods I had resisted for years. The methods that assumed atoms were real. The methods I had watched my own assistant attack. It worked. Not only did it work, it opened a door to an entirely new kind of physics. I called the discovery quanta. The constant I introduced, h, became the foundation of quantum theory. The discovery would earn me the Nobel Prize. But here is what haunts me. The other constant in my equation, the one I called K and the one that connects temperature to the energy of individual particles, I named after Boltzmann. Not because he had written the equation. He had not. I wrote it. But because the idea behind it, that the invisible motion of atoms determines the heat we feel, was entirely his. The equation on Boltzmann's tombstone, S equals K log W, is my formulation. I wrote it. But the idea belongs to Ludwig Boltzmann, and I named the constant after him because I owed him a debt I could never repay. In 1905, Albert Einstein published a paper on Brownian motion, the random jiggling of tiny particles suspended in water. Einstein showed that this motion could only be explained if atoms and molecules were real, and if they were in constant motion, exactly as Boltzmann had claimed for 30 years. It was the proof Boltzmann had been waiting for his entire life. But Boltzmann could not see it. The year before, he had visited the World's Fair in St. Louis and traveled to Berkeley and Stanford. He attended lectures on the newest discoveries in physics. He wrote an amusing account of the journey. The evidence for atoms was accumulating from every direction. The vindication was coming. But Boltzmann, exhausted, depressed, nearly blind, could not hold on long enough to witness it. In May of 1906, his physician diagnosed him with a serious form of neurasthenia and forced him to resign his teaching position. He canceled his summer lectures. 4 months later, Boltzmann took his family on vacation to Duino, to the bay where the Adriatic meets the coast. On September 5th, while his wife and daughter swam in the bay, Ludwig Boltzmann hanged himself from the window frame of their hotel room with a short cord. He died 3 years before the world admitted he was right. In 1908, 2 years after Boltzmann's death, the French physicist Jean-Baptiste Perrin conducted experiments that definitively confirmed the existence of atoms. He measured the distribution of tiny particles suspended in liquid and showed that their behavior matched Boltzmann's statistical predictions with extraordinary precision. The particles moved exactly as Boltzmann's equations said they would. There was no longer any room for doubt. Perrin would receive the Nobel Prize for this work. The prize citation praised his research on the discontinuous structure of matter. That is a formal way of saying atoms are real. In 1909, Wilhelm Ostwald, the man who had led the opposition at Lübeck, the champion of energetics, the supple matador who lost to the bull, publicly admitted that he had been wrong. He wrote that the experimental evidence had forced him to accept what he had long resisted. Atoms were real. Boltzmann had been right all along. Ernst Mach never admitted it. He died in 1916, still denying the existence of atoms. To the end, he insisted that science should describe only what can be directly observed. The atoms that Boltzmann spent his life defending remained, for Mach, a fiction. But by then, it no longer mattered what Mach believed. The evidence was overwhelming, and the man who had seen it first was already dead. In the 1930s, after the full significance of Boltzmann's work was finally recognized, a tombstone was erected at his grave in the Vienna Central Cemetery. Above a bust of his face, they carved a single equation: tombstone and memory. S equals K log W, my equation, written in my notation. With the constant I named after him, it is the most famous tombstone in the history of science, and it tells a story that most people misunderstand. They think it celebrates Boltzmann's achievement. It does, but it also records a failure, my failure, the failure of an entire generation of physicists who could not see what one man saw clearly, that the universe is made of atoms, and that their behavior can be described by probability, failure, and regret. Boltzmann knew this. He proved it mathematically. He defended it for 30 years against opponents who called him unscientific, who called his work a fantasy. And then he died, alone, in a hotel room, while his family swam in the sea. If he had lived 3 more years, he would have seen Ostwald admit defeat. If he had lived 2 more years, he would have seen Perrin begin the experiments that proved him right, beyond any doubt. If he had lived 12 more years, he would have seen me receive the Nobel Prize for work that was built on his ideas. I think about Ludwig Boltzmann more than I think about most men I have known. Boltzmann remains present, not because he was brilliant. He was brilliant, but physics has known many brilliant minds. I think about him because he was right, and being right was not enough to save him. He saw the invisible structure of the universe. He described it with mathematics. He fought for it in lecture halls and at conferences and in published papers for 30 years. And the people who opposed him were not fools. Ernst Mach was a serious philosopher. Wilhelm Ostwald won the Nobel Prize in chemistry. These were formidable minds who simply could not accept what Boltzmann was telling them, that the world is made of things too small to see, and that even the most fundamental laws of nature are governed by probability. When I stood before that equation, my equation, the one that worked but that I could not explain, I had a choice. I could continue to reject Boltzmann's methods, as I had done for years, or I could use them. I called it an act of desperation. But perhaps it was something else. Perhaps it was the moment I finally admitted that Boltzmann had been right all along, that atoms are real, that probability governs the universe, that the second law of thermodynamics is not absolute, it is statistical. Everything I built, quantum theory, Planck's constant, the revolution that changed physics, began with a man who hanged himself in a hotel room. Whether it was the battle that broke him, or an illness that had always been there, or both, I will never know. But I know that while he was fighting, I was not standing beside him. I named my constant after him. They carved my equation on his grave. But I was too late. Ludwig Boltzmann died on September 5th, 1906. He was 62 years old, and the atoms he spent his life defending
the ones no one could see, were there in that room with him. In the air he could no longer breathe. In the cord that took his life. In the silence of a daughter who never spoke of what she found. They were real. They were always real. And he knew it before any of us.